Hola, bom dia. Munson here with the Good Morning Portugal show from expatsportugal.com, where I urge you to become a premium member and enjoy all manner of benefits. And there is also a free membership. I was going to say for you cheapskates. Obviously, I wouldn't say something like that. But for those of you who want to enjoy the sense of community you get from Expats Portugal, I'm in trouble now, expatsportugal.com. You can join our community there, absolutely free of charge, and enjoy great company and answers to lots of lovely questions in a similar vibe to we had yesterday, Wednesday, Ask Anything About Portugal. Anything that was left over from yesterday, please go there to expatsportugal.com to the community. Ask away to people who have lived in, some of them have lived in Portugal for many years and are a wealth of information and very giving people too, and a good range of opinions too, as we see, especially so at the moment, because there must be a transit in Mars or something astrological like that Mrs. M would know about. Talking of Mrs. M, may I just do a quick domestic note here. If you're in charge of the washing up and you have one of those liquidizers where you can take the blades off the bottom and unscrew it, when you've washed that up, don't just put the jug back on top of the liquidizer motor without screwing in the blade part. Mrs. M did that. Well, she went to make her smoothie this morning. I hadn't screwed in the bit with the blades on. 2 glasses of water went straight through the liquidizer jug. It's not funny, really, but Louise is laughing in the green room. I can see a few good mornings. Oh, and another note to me, don't talk so fast was as a note I got from YouTube yesterday. That's going to be difficult. I will do my best. If you're here, if you watch, you're very welcome to heckle and say, slow down for goodness sake. We can't understand what you say. Aiming to please as much as possible. A terrible people-pleasing habit left over from my childhood traumas, obviously. And more news from YouTube in our community there. We did the big poll, the big survey. The conversation about the expats and the immigrants continues, and it was something like 69 to 31 of 100 people who voted up till last night in favor of or being easy about being called an expat at the moment. So it's in the favor of those who call themselves expats, which does save us a lot of money on a massive rebranding exercise here at Expats Portugal. Good morning to Hank in California. Good morning to Andy the Doc in Leiria. Bon dia, alegria de Leiria. And Paul and Louise tuned in from the UK. Bon dia, alegria a todos. Mark Rigby up in the north. Overcast. Loving the weather reports coming in. I don't do the weather anymore. I'll leave it to you. Povo de Vagim is overcast, but we know that will be burnt away by the bright sunshine here in Portugal today. Good morning from Gemini. Jana is here as well. How are you? Bon dia from Lisboa. The wonderful authority on wine that is Jana. We will talk to Jana about wine very soon, I'm sure, and I hope. La bon dia, alegria from a rather grey Cabanas Taverna today. There I go, speaking too fast. Really looking forward to today's show, talking to Louise Ross, author, Women Who Walk, and other books. I suspect quite a few, and probably others to come in the pipeline as well in just a couple of minutes. Sean Maguire, good morning, Sean. I had a lovely day out yesterday in central Portugal. Not only blessed are the cheesemakers, blessed are the people of central Portugal, of Penella, of Rabassal. Where else did I go? Castanheira de Pera, on official property business, but took a bit of a detour and checked in with some of my favorite places in central Portugal. You lucky, lucky people who live in central Portugal. Greetings from Harrogate, weather dull in the UK, roll on May and possible PT arrival. Yes, that remains hanging in the air, doesn't it? As to whether you'll be able to come in May or not, but we have our fingers crossed for that particular day. Good morning to you, Paul. Peggy, Prosecco Peggy's here. Prosecco Peggy in the house. Where is Doc's comment? I've done that, Carl, and we also unconnected. We have, it's okay. Yes, so you didn't put the liquidizer back together very well either. So I'm not alone in that. That's interesting. Okay. Asking Carl to slow down, watch it back on half speed. That's yes, because actually there ain't no pleasing some folks. And I did think to say to them, why don't you watch it at half speed? And I thought they might be thinking I was a bit flippant with them, because there's another person who complained about how long the show is. And I said, well, maybe you could watch it at 1.5 times speed. Haven't heard back from that person as yet. Penny Albertella, bon dia alegria. Sunny here this morning. My fruit trees are blossoming. Very happy. Isn't that lovely? Morning to you, Penny. Susan, happy Thursday. Oh, yes, so it is. Sunny morning here. Yay! Head gardener McGrady. Good morning, people. Looks like a nice day. But the 10-day weather forecast is looking wet. It's April, isn't it? We should only be expecting a little bit of that in among the beautiful Portuguese sunshine. And finally, for now, back at home office work, so in bunny ears today. So obviously back on the red wine during the day after doing my... So I'm not necessarily directed at you, Peter. I don't want to besmirch your professional reputation. After doing your Canadian Egyptology group websites. So Bon Dia do Perafita. That's got a nice ring to it as well. Good morning to you, Peter. Thank you for saying hello. Let's bring Louise on now. Good morning to you. It's an hola, bon dia, alegria to Louise Ross. Hello.
Hello, Carl. I have been laughing back here in the green room. It's been a very entertaining introduction this morning.
Well, I thought I would mention it just to save anybody the, I suppose, the inconvenience, the marital stress, and obviously expense. Let's hope that liquidizer makes it through this experience that I've put it through today. But there you are in the beautiful blue-green room, and I was remarking...
I am.
Is it wallpaper or a picture? Or what
No, it's actually a painting. It's a painting. She's an American artist that's lived in Lisbon for probably about 12 years now, I think. Oh. She was an illustrator in New York, and when they came to Lisbon to live, her husband has a drumming academy out of Porto, I think. Yeah. She took her tiny little tight illustrations onto very large canvases and did very well until the economic collapse in 2008. And then she had this studio full of canvases that she couldn't move. So I went in there one day and said, oh, I'll have that and I'll have that.
Yeah.
And I love it because the blue is so happy, or the pattern is actually just very happy and fun.
It is very jolly, very, very nice. Sorry, what was the artist's name? Let's give her a bit of a plug.
I'll
put you on the spot.
Kuchera. Oh, God.
That's okay. Sorry, I shouldn't have done this. This is about you.
Her last name is Kuchera. Kuchera. I'll look up her first name before we're done.
We will speak again, I suspect, and or we can share that via our forum or whatever. We will find out. But what a lovely, jolly background, but very thoughtful of you. But it's not about the artist; it's about you today. Women Who Walk. Is that your notable work and your most famous and best-selling?
Well, I think when I reached out to you, I told you that. Well, I'm going to do a little self-promotion here. I can't help myself. Here they are. Women Who Walk.
Yep.
And then the sequel is The Winding Road to Portugal. There we go. And when I reached out to you, I said that The Winding Road to Portugal had just been recognized by expatbookshop.com as one of their top 10 for 2020. And for listeners, that may be a really good resource, actually, the Expat Bookshop, because they have wonderful titles about the expat experience. And I mean, I know yesterday you had this very interesting conversation about, are we expats? Are we immigrants? Are we... Yeah. But anyway, for the purposes of me talking about the books today, we can say expats.
And have I done that on the screen there? So they need to be looking for you as the author.
Well, no, they can go to the expatbookshop.com to look for all sorts of titles on the expatriate experience. But for my book, they can just go to my website, which is louiseross.com.
Okay, I'll put that on the screen as well. All right, sorry, I interrupted you there, but it's important people know where to find you.
Yeah, my website, louiseross.com. But anyway, so that's when I reached out to you, because I was really excited that this book was recognized as one of the top 10 for 2020. And I noticed that Shannon De Silva is on this morning, and her son, George, is in The Winding Road. And he actually talks a little about the wine business that they've developed, which they developed last year during the lockdown.
Yeah, inspired.
But the books are 20 women and 20 men. They're interviews, so a total of 40 interviews of expatriates and immigrants who've
Nicely done. Well done.
who've moved country to country. They've left their country of origin and they've moved country to country en route to a life in Portugal, and some independently and some with partner and or family. And some have not necessarily stayed. They've maybe moved to another country. But at the time at which I interviewed them, everybody was here in Portugal, loving their life here and wanting to stay here. But, you know, life happens and things do happen, and COVID happened, and people have made changes since I've interviewed them. But actually most of the men are still here. Yeah.
But in the title there, in the first one, Women Who Walk. I mean, I've got all sorts of questions. I'm sure other people will. So put your questions in the comments, folks. But Women Who Walk, you could be forgiven for thinking this is the interviews with 20 women who walked to Portugal. How, where does the walking come in? Where does the perambulatory aspect come into the book?
Well, I thought it was a wonderful metaphor, Carl. I mean, don't be so literal that women had walked here to Portugal. You know, walking, it can be just. In fact, one of the things that came to mind when I decided to use this as the title was Nancy Sinatra's song,
"Oh
These
Yes,
Boots Are Made for Walking." So there's some wonderful lines in that song. So, you know, it gave me the title gave me this sense of women, empowered women moving about the world, women with the determination to move forward, you know, that sort of thing.
yeah." And then metaphorically, then, so when someone says, "Right, that's it, I'm walking," like Piers Morgan, "That's it, I'm walking," it's that sense of like going from one thing to another, but also with this with top notes of purpose and drive. And one of these days, these boots are going to walk all over you, maybe.
Yeah. We'll leave the Nancy Sinatra bit out because then we sound like angry women, and I don't want us to go there either. But you're right; those prior metaphors are perfect. Yes. So anyway, the walking thing does have a significant relevance actually, because when I moved here from the US. I'm originally from Australia, but I was living in the US before I moved here, and in Colorado, in fact. So in Colorado, up against the Rocky Mountains, one of the things that we did socially on the weekend was to hike into the high country. You know, that's the way you spend your spare time, in outdoor activity in a place like Colorado. So when I came here, within a week of arriving here, I found International Women in Portugal, which is a social organisation. Lots of the listeners will probably know about it, for international women to connect and help each other find their way, living in this new country with its Russian-sounding language and its slow bureaucracies and all the frustrations that we expatriates encounter. But anyway, so I joined this organisation, and one of their weekly activities pre-COVID was the Sintra hiking, or the Sintra walking group, I can't remember. Anyway, so every Friday we would rendezvous at various hiking entry points around the Sintra municipality to do like a 2-hour hike, and then we'd lunch. And on this weekly activity, I was bumping elbows with women from all over the world, multilingual women, and I was just like blown away with the stories that they would sort of share as you kind of, you know, bump elbows. And I thought, wow, this is serious business here in Portugal. It attracts some pretty fascinating people. And so I think I made an assumption that probably somewhere along the line someone had started to gather stories about the women in the expatriate community and perhaps commit them to paper. But in fact, no one had. So I thought, well, I'm going to do this because I'm hearing some phenomenal tales here, and I'd really like to interview these people and document their journeys.
Fantastic.
And that's where it came from. So it came from that Central Walk, the title, basically.
Brilliant. And I'm sure you'll tell us about some one or two anecdotes about outstanding individuals from the book. Love to hear those. But what I want to find out first is, it's a lovely idea. Were you a writer before that? Were you an investigative journalist? I mean, clearly you're a curious person, which goes hand in hand with being an expat in many ways, doesn't it?
It does. Like you, I'm a good question asker. I mean, I tend to be, although I'm going to be talking a lot this morning, I did say to you, an hour and a half, Carl, I've got to talk for an hour and a half. I mean, I'm not necessarily a verbal person. I tend to be a listener because I am really curious about people's stories. And if you give people half a chance, they do love to tell you their story.
True.
Yeah. So, no, I do not have a journalistic background. I did not study journalism. In fact, I didn't study writing, but I studied psychology. So that's how I found my way to the US. I went there to do graduate studies in psychology and counseling. And I practiced for a short period of time, but it was a marvelous program because there was a lot of experiential work that we had to do as part of our studies. And of course, one of those is just a very basic class in active listening skills.
Yes.
So, I think I probably have very good active listening skills. And that really sets you up well to be an interviewer. Yeah. Because so long as you kind of create the space for people to share their story, they will.
Yeah.
And that's how it came about. But I do have a background writing, but I had not done interview style writing. But it turned out that it was probably one of the easiest ways to put together a book, to just collect stories, transcribe them, edit them, and massage them till they read really well.
That's a really nice way of putting it, is it?
Massage them.
Massage the story into a nice relaxed, smelling slightly of lavender by the end of it.
I wish.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's go to a few comments and then perhaps to some of the sort of notable individuals who you've come across, without giving too much. No spoilers, but I'm sure there are some interesting tales to tell from the tale telling that you've done there. Tiago Moutinho, hello from the Algarve. Love your channel. Keep going. I will, Tiago. Yes, just try and stop me. But thank you for that lovely feedback, Tiago. Bon dia, doing my walk this afternoon to Oliveira do Bairro. So for once I can tune in live, as usually I'm out at 9. That's from Andy, who's Austin's dad, using Austin's Facebook. Fantastic. I love it when parents use their children's social media. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that? Bon dia, wet snow in Moscow today. Well, good morning to you, Conan. Sunny and beautiful on Terceira this morning. Bon dia all. Lovely to get your messages from Terceira, Donna. Fantastic. Gary Austin, look at him, late on parade this morning because of kitten duties. Oh, Gary. And I noticed the messages still coming in from YouTube there. Just put a few pictures of cats up on Facebook when you get back, and that should balance things out a bit after your naughty step position on there. And what first came to mind when I saw that comment on the screen is how we talked in the wine club about having a calendar with strategically placed bottles of wine on our naked selves in the naked calendar of the wine club. But this takes it to a whole new level. I'm thinking Gary Austin, Athena poster, the Beefy guy holding a kitten. That's a crowd pleaser, isn't it? But then if you mix that with a naked calendar, and then I thought, no, probably not. Probably nakedness and kittens and calendars don't all go together. Excuse the way my mind works. I'm so sorry. I will move on. Louise Ross, expatbookshop.com. So go there to buy the books, expatbookshop.com, or go to the website as well, louiseross.com. Best place to go. I'm getting the cues from Louise there, as you'll see. Bon dia todos from Jani in Belgium. I can follow your speed in English, Carl. No problem at all. Thank you for that. That's a nice validation of the approach there. And yeah, that is a good tip. Maybe because you can watch it at various speeds in YouTube. This technology is awesome. LouiseRoss.com. That's where to buy the books from. That's the best place to do it. Donna Grassa is here. Hola, bon dia from Donna Grassa as well. Good morning to you, Grassa. Claire's here. Bon dia, Carl. Looks like Portugal is opening up a bit now. Well, internally, domestically, that would appear to be the case. A lot of people are taking it as a complete green light. I've seen them out and about. How is it? Where are you? In which part of Portugal are you, Louise?
Estoril, right on the coast.
Oh, we must talk about Estoril as well. But what's it like there in this second phase of deconfinement? What's the atmosphere like in Estoril at the moment?
It's getting kind of busy.
Yeah,
I mean, all the promenade cafes are the outdoor seating is happening, and people are 4 top tables, and they're walking along the Paradão and enjoying the sun and on the beach and swimming. I mean, the season has started. Yes,
it has, hasn't it? People didn't need much encouragement to get back out there. And you say Estoril, I mean, you're in such good company there, aren't you? Ian Fleming, the Bond creator, was a known visitor to Estoril there. What a fabulous
place. Indeed.
If we have time in our epic 90 minutes, we may talk a little bit about Estoril as well. First question for you from Paul. Question for Louise. Want to write a book of working in France in the Alps, but not sure where to start. From a writer's point of view, the story is in my head, but not on paper. Can you give an aspiring budding writer a little bit of help before we look more closely into your couple of books there?
Oh, well, Paul, I also worked in the French Alps. I worked in Courchevel. I don't know if that's where you were, but are you thinking of writing a memoir? I mean, if you're thinking of writing a memoir, then there are all sorts of online classes that you can take to help you get going for something like a memoir. If you're thinking of doing just sort of a non-fiction exploratory book about the French Alps, well, that would require just some deep digging and research, I would imagine, and piecing it together. Yes. But either way, there really are some marvelous online courses these days because of COVID. I think there's just the online world is exploding.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And would you agree? I mean, the best things I've heard about writing are just get on with it. Just put pen to paper or finger to keyboard. And one of the two other things, and these are applicable to all aspects of life, really. But there's no such thing as good writing. There's only good rewriting. So again, suggesting that you crack on with it and massage it, like you said, and don't let the excellent spoil the good. There are far too many sort of perfectionist tendencies, aren't there, spoiling incredible creativity in this world of ours. We had a brief conversation, didn't we, about beauty before we started, inspired by the image behind you. And it's so important, isn't it, that people don't let the excellent spoil the good, and be confident in their own beginning and ability and creativity, and it will get better, won't it, if you make a start? I suspect.
You're absolutely right. In fact, the way I came to writing is, I alluded to it, is that I'm not a very verbal person. So it's my way to sort of explore my experience of the world. Plus, and this is not unusual, but I'm kind of dyslexic, and I was late to reading as a child, and in fact really, really struggled as a child. And I think my teachers sort of gave up on me in secondary school, but I didn't give up on myself. So in my undergraduate studies, it was actually recommended that I take remedial English classes.
Wow.
So I was so humiliated that I did. And by the time I was doing my graduate studies, and knowing that I'd have to produce a thesis, a significant body of writing, I just worked really, really hard. And then once I did it, I felt like I'd achieved something incredible. And that was the start. I thought, wow, if I could do this, imagine what else I could do. And that just put me on the path to writing. So, you don't have to be a literary genius. You don't have to be anything other than who you are to write. It's just your experience of your world, really. And you're quite right. You just get down and just do it.
Yeah, Yeah, and who knows what else you might discover in the process. And there you're describing sort of collateral benefits of cracking on and digging a bit deeper and going against what you've been told. So the external voices can become the voices in the head, can't they? You internalize messages from childhood, and what a lovely breakthrough you've and transformational experience you've clearly had by becoming a writer. Fantastic. So elbow bumping with the ladies of the Sintra hiking or walking group. I suppose I was going to say, without giving too much away, I mean, you expose them in the book anyway. So can you tell us a bit more about some of these extraordinary individuals, women that you've met, and then we can move on to the fellas in the sequel as well.
Yeah. Well, they're from 16 different countries. That's the subtitle, how 20 women from 16 countries came to live in Portugal. And let's see, I'm going to flip open the book because it's actually been a couple of years now, so I've got to look up the girls. Oh, that's right. So it starts with the Dahlia, who's from Beirut.
Wow.
So we all know a little bit about the Lebanon and during the Civil War, but she lived through it, and so she talks about growing up during the Civil War and that her family, toward the end of the war, emigrate, and they ultimately emigrate to Canada and Ottawa, for goodness sakes. And she talks about being a good Muslim daughter working for the Canadian government, doing what is it, sort of public analysis or something out in the field, in rural environments. So there's this wonderful juxtaposition between growing up on the bomb streets of Beirut to being out in the field in rural environments in Ottawa, working for the public sector, for the government. So that starts the book, and then we have
contrast. Yeah, what an incredible contrast.
It really is. Then we have someone from Scotland, and Audrey is a geophysicist. And coming to this, I mean, I was learning so much. In other words, perhaps a little naive, and I didn't even know what a geophysicist was when Audrey told me what she did.
Yeah, you're forgiven.
Really? Yeah, come on. Who out there knows what do a geophysicist really do? So I had to ask her in great detail about the nature of her work, which was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And she had grown up in a rather sort of eccentric environment. Her parents lived above the bar or the hotel where they worked. So they lived above the distillery, I can't quite remember what that is. And she said that she and her brother would just wander down to the bar for a Coke every now and then. And then ultimately she finds her way to various spots around the world to do her research, and then the Middle East, where she works for Shell, I think. So that one's really fascinating. Isabelle Metteron is from Paris. At 17, her parents paved the way for her to study in the US. She became a marine biologist and ultimately lived in Puerto Rico, I think. She went to university there, and then has moved every couple of years because she ultimately married a naval officer. So of course they move. They're deployed every couple of years. So her life's very peripatetic. And they come and go from Lisbon.
Yes.
I could go on and on. Do you want me to pause?
No, I'm very happy to hear about these extraordinary people, and I think it bears witness to this idea that everyone's got an amazing story. I think some people are reluctant about that, aren't they? But I don't think I've met anyone who's truly boring. And some people, try and claim that in a kind of modest way. Oh no, I haven't done. And then they compare themselves, don't they, to some of the people you've talked about there with those interesting stories of world travel. But everyone's got something, and this you must know by now. That if you are able to scratch the surface and people are forthcoming, there's always something in there, isn't there? People underestimate themselves massively.
They really do. I mean, the interesting or not so interesting thing is that you've identified something that happened during the interview process, or when I would approach women actually to ask them if they'd be involved in the project. And a response that I got from a few women is, oh, my life's not interesting. There are far more women in this community with more interesting lives than mine. And I was like, well, I'm not approaching you to ask you to participate because I think your story is boring. I mean, I know a little about it. It is not boring. Come on.
Yeah, so true.
I got to tell you, Carl, if I do a little contrast in comparison to the men's book, none of the men said, oh, I'm not interesting. There are more men here with far more interesting stories to tell. The men were happy to share their stories. I'm sorry, but maybe there's a little gender thing going on here, but men don't tend to discount their story as less than or boring, but women do, unfortunately.
That is fascinating. A little bit of gender stereotyping from a generalized point of view we can tolerate. We're not going to have a woke outburst or anything like that. I don't think. I don't know. Things are getting eggy in the world at the moment, so who knows what might happen there. But we know the point you're making there, don't we? And it's obviously can't be applied as a scientific rule. But I find that fascinating. That interview me. This is the fellas, isn't it? Yes, I'm interesting. And when I said I haven't met anybody truly boring, that wasn't a challenge. I don't need. I mean, I'm guessing in the comments people are going to say, "Oh, you need to meet my Uncle Dave" or whatever. I defy you to present me with somebody who I couldn't have a great conversation with, it because it's the emphasis on the interviewer as well, isn't it? And
it is, because in fact Uncle Dave has got a past, so it's when you start sort of digging into the past that you find that Uncle Dave's got stories to tell.
And maybe that's why he's so quiet and apparently boring. He doesn't want that lid lifted. Okay, we got a few comments and questions coming in because we do want to hear about some of those self-proclaimed interesting fellas. I missed the debate yesterday. In my view, expat to me describes what someone is no longer. Immigrant describes what someone is now. That's a very good distinction. I like that. My family were described by the British as immigrants, as they were, with Penny with her Italian extraction there. A funny word, isn't it, extraction? It sounds like a dental procedure as well as a sort of ethnic origin. Carl, where are you? Okay, Peggy. Here's a challenge. In the spirit of what Louise just said, the men didn't have any trouble imagining that they were interesting to Louise as interviewees. Can you similarly suggest that you are beefy, fellas? Because I think Peggy is egging us on to have this calendar made of us with kittens. Who wouldn't buy that as a Christmas present? So, and we've got the photographer. I think Paul will do it.
There's actually an Australian calendar with gorgeous beefy firemen and kittens.
Okay, well, we can compete with that. Maybe. That's so kind of you, Louise. That's it, maybe. Okay, Ponty, Korea, Becky, Carmo, Carl, and Louisa. Louisa, lovely morning here. Slept well after clearing the pond and well of duckweed. Living the expat dream. Clearing the pond and well of
bleach.
Slept well, Pete. Pete will be in the calendar, I'm sure. Can I put your name down, Pete, for that? You sound great, Carl. Keep it up. Speed is just fine. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I wasn't. You have to develop a little bit of a thick skin and sense of humor about these things. But I just report to you what the information and feedback that comes in. I find it fascinating. Louise, how did you find the people for your book, and was it easy? Great question from Johnny. You gave us a little bit of an insight into that, and we know where the women came from. So when it came to as you got towards or at what point did you think I need to talk to men now in this whole process? When did that happen?
I didn't have any intention of doing another book like this, but it was when I started promoting the women's book, again, pre-COVID, so I could do it in person, so at presentations and so on. Of course, one of the questions that the women asked is, are you going to do the men's book? Yeah. And my response was, no, it's taken me a couple of years to do the women's book, enough already. I need to get a life now. But then, of course, what happened is I had an experience. I called an Uber home from Lisbon one day, and as happens, because I asked questions, the Uber driver told me his story. Well, I mean, I took my seatbelt off and I was leaning through the two front seats, looking at him like, are you serious? And so he's telling me this story, and I thought, oh, that's it. I really do have to ask him if I can interview him. So I did an interview with my Uber driver, several weeks later, and I realized, oh, this is the beginning of it. So, but then I thought, well, how am I going to find the men? Because, I'm very active in this international women's organization, and I'm around women all the time. But, of course, what happens is when you start telling people you're working on this project, everybody tells you about men out there with fascinating stories. So then I just sort of started to compile a list of men that people had told me about, and I would just call them or email them and end up having phone conversations with strange men, which was very interesting, until I had collated a list of men that I wanted to interview. So that's how I found the men. It sort of snowballed.
Very thorough, and so you have a quite a systematic approach by the sound of it there, which probably comes from your psychological background, maybe.
Well, not so much. I mean, I know a good story too, Carl. So okay. It's not like 20 men and 20 women just turned up and I said, yes, they're the ones I should interview. Yeah, I mean, there were some stories that didn't make the cut. Let's just put it that way. And for the men's book, I knew that I didn't want to. I'm sorry if any gentlemen out there are embassy men, don't take this personally or don't be offended.
Too late.
I in an expatriate community, of course, there are folks who, move around the world via embassies. So we know that story well, or we're very aware of the very successful male story. And I didn't necessarily want that because that, here we go, I'm going to get into sort of a kind of psychobabble or...
No, do it. This is fascinating. Yeah.
I didn't want to share the dominant male narrative, which is one of corporate success.
Okay.
Because we hear that every day.
Yes.
And we that is a little bit boring. So what I wanted is more, I wanted something more along the lines of men who had kind of pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, had maybe had some struggles that they encountered in life that they had to overcome, because that makes for juicier storytelling.
Of course.
And it really does, because we talked a little before about stereotypes, and what happened is when I came to the men's book, of course as a woman I was carrying stereotypes about how men are in the world or how men move about the world, which is that, men are more courageous than women, men are better resourced, men are less emotional, men are less attached to family and children, men are less relationship oriented. And surprisingly or not so, what I learned, or what the men taught me, is that these stereotypes are all just stereotypes, and none of us fit neatly into boxes, because we're all sort of unique and interesting. So in fact, the stories that the men tell have this emotional component based on their life experiences that's actually more powerful than the women's, because at some level the women are just sort of more pragmatic about the way they encounter challenges, the challenges perhaps of moving, or the challenges of packing up family and relocating, or the challenges of dealing with third culture kids. Listeners might know that term, but third culture kids are kids whose parents are perhaps from two different cultures and then grow up in a third culture, which is a fascinating topic that there's a whole lot of research about that now, and a whole lot of stuff online about it. But anyway, so women deal with all of these challenges, I think, in a way more pragmatic way, just because that's the nature of being a woman in the world today. Whereas, men encounter these challenges perhaps with less tools, because the tools to me that men have acquired in the world or growing up are more related to developing career and the skills to make money and the skills and career to provide for themselves or family.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit more limited in that regard than women who have a more holistic set of tools in their toolbox.
I love this. This is an amazing insight. It really is. And one challenge to the idea that men aren't emotional. I saw a brilliant meme the other day, and it was like, when was anger declassified as an emotion? It's like men are differently emotional. And it's like in cards, isn't it? In playing cards, your strong suite. The emotional strong suite is anger, but it's not seen as an emotion when it's done by men. And this, I think that's really an unfair sleight of hand between the genders. But anyway, that's just a small part of what we're talking about here. But that's so fascinating.
Well, but during the interview process, there was no anger. There was a lot of emotion. And I won't give away names or anything like that. There's a lot of subtext in the storytelling, so you can kind of identify the emotional moments. But there are a lot of tears in the men telling their stories. It was really kind of heartbreaking for me at times. Not to say that these are, big hanky kind of stories, hanky-wipey, tear-jerky kind of stories, but it's just when men maybe are separated from family or children because of work or work relocating them abroad or because of divorce. I mean, man, you hear as a woman, of course, I hear the story of divorce from women and the struggles that they might go through. But the emotional impact on men as a result of being separated from their children and the breakdown of a marriage is enormous.
Yes.
And it was kind of heartbreaking to hear some of that. But of course, that wasn't the whole storytelling of that the men shared, but this might be a part of their life journey, that perhaps marriage breakdown, separation from children, and so on. So there was a lot of emotions shared. There was no anger.
Got it.
In the men's story.
Sorry, that's just my little addition and input there. That was co-opting to the conversation here, but yeah, that is really amazing and somewhat therapeutic by the sound of it as well. So on the face of it, the sort of blustery male stereotype. Yes, interview me, I'm interesting. But maybe it was a cry for help as well. I need to talk. I do need to talk about these things in a way that is as acceptable. So they're not going to therapy. They're telling an author a story with possibly the same result.
You're right. In fact, I think that's a question that has been asked of me in some of the presentations about the men's book. Was it therapeutic for the men? And I think it really was. I mean, I didn't set out for it to be that way, and I was not at any time therapist for any of the men or the women. That's my past. That is not my present. But again, there is something... there's something very sacred about being a good listener. When you give people the space to just share, it's simply therapeutic.
Yes.
And I think men in conversation with one another probably don't do that for each other. I think women do that for men.
Yes.
I have actually watched one of your shows. What is it? Your
Man Cave.
The Man Cave show. Maybe you should talk about mental health on one of those shows one day.
That is a really good suggestion, and we
and mental health.
I think we've done it to some extent, but we don't shy away from big topics. In fact, we're talking about it's the Sexpat special for anyone else who might be interested. And then the subtitle of the show this Friday is "We're Sexy and You Know It," and we're talking about sex and sexuality from a male man cave point of view, in an unabandoned, or is it abandoned? Or in a free and open way, and open to question from the increasing number of female viewers we have. So if you do want to understand the expat man of a certain age psyche, don't watch our show. But if you want to laugh, definitely come along and ask us questions. on Friday from 10 o'clock. Thank you for allowing me to plug that man cave thing. And that is a really good suggestion. I think, yeah.
Well, it's a really important show, actually, Carl, because in Australia we've got this whole movement about the man shed, not the man cave, but the man shed, where men get together in sheds for a few beers.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think, a fantastic movement, because when men are, I think, given permission to, you know, kind of bump elbows to elbows and have deep and meaningfuls, all sorts of stuff comes out. Yes. So speaking of men and sexuality, there's one interviewee who was incredibly brave. I feel comfortable talking about him on your show because he's very public with his story. He's very active in the entrepreneurial community here too, Terry Hamill. And he's an abuse survivor. And so I think that there's increased opportunity for men to also talk about sexual abuse. And it's a very important thing for men to talk about, because not only are women sexually abused, of course men are as well, but women have, I think, a landscape these days to be very open and free to talk about it because there is support for it. There's still not a whole lot of support for men going public with sexual abuse, but there's just as many men sexually abused as there are women in their childhood, and we do need to talk about it. So the man cave might be a place to just touch on it. I
would like to think we are open in that way, and we don't shy away from, you know, that's the context for us, is that we don't avoid things. So obviously that can get messy and difficult, but I think we're going to stay true to that. We've got some good fellas at the basis of it in the form of Frank and Gary and Joel and the associated community that are really dedicated listeners who are missing going down the pub but have a virtual sense of that as well.
Yeah, and life's messy, Carl. So it is a messy conversation.
Yes.
So it needs to be had. It's a conversation that you need to have. Yeah.
I'm inspired by that and strengthened by your encouragement there. Thank you, Louise. And I'm minded to say, but this is about you this morning and your book. But it's also about the people you've written about. And we can't go past I think it might be the first gentleman you mentioned. What was it about the Uber driver that caused you to lean forward? Could you tell us just a little bit more without giving too much away, or, you know?
Yeah. So, in fact, both books start with individuals who grew up in war. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I suppose here's where I'm a little naive. I mean, I'm an Australian. I grew up in rural Australia in a tiny town 2 hours southeast of Melbourne. You know, in some sense, it was a very ideal childhood. You know, it's a safe environment. Kids are out playing. Not much happens. So in that sense, it's probably a little bit boring as well. So to hear about people who are younger than me, actually, both these individuals were in their mid-40s, and both Dahlia and Ramon, in their mid-40s, growing up in different parts of the world. Dahlia in Lebanon and Ramon in Angola. Mm-hmm. So he grew up during the Angolan Civil War. Born in 1974, so just at the point where the revolution happened here, and the Portuguese were leaving the former colonies. So, you know, Angola kind of imploded because there was a civil war brewing since the early 60s, and once the Portuguese military left, the civil war really began to fire up, and he grew up in that. So, you know, he sort of talks about his mother fleeing from the local village that was being raised with him in one of the on her back, I think, and she's carrying the family treasures on her head, which was gold. And apparently what happened is that the Portuguese would and I have to be very politically correct here, I think, they would encourage the locals with gold. They would encourage them to adopt the Portuguese way, so the language and culture, in effect. And so Ramon's father was a teacher, and he taught the local Portuguese children, let's just say, the European Portuguese way of living. So anyway, his mother therefore had all this gold that she was given from the father, who was given it from the Portuguese colonialists.
There's no other way of putting it.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so, the village is being raised. She's got, children in one on each hand, booty on her head, Ramon on her back.
Amazing.
Children are being abandoned because they can't get away fast enough. The aunties apparently tell his mother, drop the baby. He's weighing you down. Keep going. And she doesn't. So this is sort of his beginning story.
Yes.
So he has a bullet wound in the head, a bullet wound in the leg, and these incidences have happened at various points in his life. So for me, this is such an extreme life experience.
Yes.
And then in his in his late teens, he self-selects as a refugee because he wants to get the hell out. He realizes that, his chances of survival and growing a productive life in Luanda are lessening with each year. So he goes to the UK, and he ends up in Bradford, and he goes to college there and learns English and ends up volunteering for a refugee organisation and builds a really significant life for himself there, and ultimately gets British citizenship, but falls in love. And there's always a love story involved, isn't it? And his love is a very clever girl, also from Angola, who wants to go back to Angola and work in government because she has, a degree in whatever it is, maybe chemical engineering or some significant role that she ultimately plays in government in Angola. And he doesn't want to go back because he has basically, I think he's got post-traumatic stress syndrome from his life experiences. He doesn't want to go back. But he says in his story, love spoke louder, or love spoke louder. And then he goes back.
Stop it.
I know.
You said these weren't tear-jerking stories. That was you're misleading us there, I think. Go on.
But he goes back. Anyway, so they build up a really great life. I mean, they basically young professionals working their way up, just as any young couple would in any country. They have 2 kids. They adopt a daughter. They finance other underprivileged kids through their education. I mean, they're doing marvelous work. But he encounters a number of situations, or he's on the receiving end of a number of violent holdups and muggings, and then was shot again. No. And I think that was just it for him.
Yeah.
And
you understand that.
He wants to leave. He wants his wife and the children to leave. He wants to come to Portugal. She won't, because she's one of the first female, and I can't remember what her job is, and it's not in the book because he wants to maintain her privacy.
Yes.
But she's one of the first women in government in this role. She travels internationally with this job, and she won't leave. But he's so, I think, damaged by the violence in Luanda that he leaves. and he comes to Lisbon to start over.
That must have been a choice of biblical proportions, right? What a horrible situation.
And it really is, because he is a very religious man, and he does depend very much on his religion to cope with the things that he's dealt with.
Incredible. And I mean, humanity. We've got some work to do here, as we find from stories. Talking to Louise Ross, who has these amazing interviews with people. You just heard the story of Ramon there. And
I'll just say that someone challenged me too, because these stories are expatriates or /immigrants.
Yes.
And someone challenged me and said, but you said he's a refugee. Well, he was a refugee to the UK. He emigrated back to his country of origin, where he then emigrated to Portugal. So he does start out as a refugee, but then he no longer has refugee status once he's a British citizen and has a significant job and life and building up a career for himself in the UK, and then the same back in Luanda in Angola.
So what their point was, that he shouldn't be in the book on the basis of being a refugee. Not technically correct. Oh, come on, whoever you are, stop it. That story needs to be shared. And at this point, I have to say to Uber, give that man and all of your workers their holiday rights. I mean, that man has earned, I don't know, we should give him the rest of his life off, shouldn't we, really, rather than having to make a living as a taxi driver. This is a person who should be working in public office, in an advisory role, saying what goes on, how he's dealt with it, and so on. What an amazing and inspirational character. Quite incredible.
Yeah, I've got to say, actually, that the stories are incredibly inspiring. Now, one of the interesting contrasting stories in the women's book is Sandhya, whose heritage is Gujarat Indian. But her grandfather, I think, set off from Gujarat on one of the Portuguese caravels in the early part of the 19th century.
What?
18th century. I can't remember.
Yes.
In the 1800s. At 17. I might have been younger. Anyway, not knowing where he was going, but apparently the Indians from Gujarat is very entrepreneurial, and they sort of, metaphorically set sail for opportunity. And he wound up just disembarking in Mozambique, which was not Mozambique. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, so then ultimately she is born in Mozambique. And then during the 70s, when the Portuguese had to leave Africa, the Portuguese colonies, her family, I think it was then, went back to India. But because her father and mother and the kids, including Sandhya, had grown up in an Indian community in Mozambique, they no longer identified with their Indian heritage, and they didn't fit in. So then her father came to Lisbon, I think, to renew their Portuguese passports, because they were in Portuguese Mozambique. And the family ultimately, having, again, built up a very middle-class life in Mozambique, wind up in Lisbon. I think there's 5 of them, living in like a 2-bedroom apartment, this kind of thing, starting over again. And as per their tradition, she, as a young woman, is then married in an arranged marriage. But backpedal a little bit, because of the stress of all of this. I mean, can you imagine the stress of the kicked out of one country, you go to another country where you don't fit in, you come to another country where you start over again, and they don't quite fit in here either, and she's teased a lot because she's wearing traditional Indian clothing to school, and all these sorts of things that happen to immigrants. Anyway, she develops I've forgotten the name. where your skin discolors.
Oh, pigmentation.
Yeah, or the skin develops vitiligo. Yeah.
I think Doc will be able to tell us what that is. But okay,
yeah,
so
vitiligo or something. Anyway,
right.
so she develops that. She starts to lose pigment in her skin. So she, anyway, so her parents are really concerned they'll never be able to marry her off because she's so ugly. I mean, it's just devastating. Anyway, she is in this arranged marriage, and then she marries beneath her caste, I think.
Yeah, well, so the expected station.
Yes, because her family are Brahmin.
Oh my goodness.
And anyway, so he's also an entrepreneur, and he decides that there's opportunity for them to go back to Angola in the midst of the civil war. So Ramon is coming here, and she and her husband, she's a bit older than Ramon, are going back to Angola or going to Angola. So it's this really, I mean, somehow the stories actually mirror each other, or you kind of read, Ramon's story in the men's book, and you can go to Sandia's story in the women's book, and you can learn about what it was like for her to go into that war-torn environment when he's leaving, because her husband feels, and mind you, she's got 2 babies at this point, or she's pregnant with baby number 2 on the way, going into a war-torn country.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if it's the happy part of the story because they're in a war-torn country, but they have enormous success. I mean, they're so savvy in the way they do business during the middle of a war that they build up this very successful business.
Yes.
I mean, go figure. It's just I think my chin was on the floor during a lot of these interviews.
Of course, it must have been. And people, we were having a roller coaster ride here. So Sean is saying, I can do Mr. May. So some people are self-declaring being boring, and that's a reference to James May. I think. Is he called Captain Slow on Top Gear? Then Colin says, with our encouragement, I just realised how interesting I am. Thanks, Louise. However, later on, he says, listening to the Uber driver story, I cancel my previous comment. I'm boring now. And I'm sure a lot of us are feeling that. It's quite incredible. And you've got me tearing up here. Normally what I do is reach for something to blow my nose on. And last time it was the sacred cloth around which Mrs. M's tarot cards are wrapped. And I was drying my eyes and blowing my nose on that. I won't make that mistake again. That and the liquidizer thing.
Well, let's think about the liquidizer. That'll make us laugh.
You've got, yes, right. Wow, really an incredible wow. Let's go to a few more comments. This is a great question, actually. Did you find a publisher or did you self-publish? So let's come back to that, because I think that a lot of people want to hear about that. Peggy says, I love hearing your accent every morning and all those crazy British words. What, like Marks and Spencer? That sort of thing. Gary, you have an over-fertile imagination. Guilty as charged, Gary. My calendar days, if I had any at all, are long gone. More suitable now for National Geographic link feature. Spotted in central Portugal. Brilliant. Robert Ryan, morning, mate. Greetings from Cornwall. Hello there. Home of the Cornish pasty and the cream tea. And is it cream or jam? And all those other Cornish stereotypes that I can immediately think of, Robert. Good morning to you. Joel, up in Matosinhos, saying he's one of our man cave stalwarts, our Portuguese. Good morning to you, Joel. Still got a runny nose here, sorry. Louise, they put me in remedial English as well, so there is always hope, even though most people from other countries don't have a clue what I'm going on about. That's because he's a Brummie. You would have had to not only transcribe, but translate with Gary if you ever get round to interviewing him.
Because he's from where?
Birmingham in the UK. Yeah, Bonte, all from an overcast Brexitshire, formerly known as the United Kingdom. Every day that goes by proves moving to Portugal is the way forward from Ian. What happened, Ian? What now? Paul Richards worked in La Rosière in France.
Okay.
Italian border, worked on the slopes with clients for 15 years. The stories about people on the mountains and the things they get up to. Yes, there's another show for us. Fantastic. Getting Queen's English, listening to you. Well, with both myself and Louise here this morning, defending the Queen's English as we do from our respective corners of the world. It's our pleasure. Very interesting, Louise, says Penny. Absolutely. Bon dia, expats. This is Max from Goa. Good morning to you. A Music Wonders 300 in Goa, but it's lovely there. What time of day are you? Getting into a Goan sunset possibly right now. Louise, and the young people in van life and their blogs or settling off grid, also interesting perhaps. Oh yes, those sorts of people moving about. Well, of course we're going to ask her which book is next, because Louise will probably at several points have said never again, but may well be encouraged to write another one. Yes, remember those days. Mozambique, Timor, and Angola, says Jana. Abu Muhammad, I want to be Louise's neighbour and have coffee with her. She is so charming and sweet. There you go. I mean, yes, you're being asked to move house, I suspect, or maybe Abu is coming your way. Evening from New Zealand, from Denise and Vinny there. The caravels were used in the... Oh, he's making us do Roman numerals here. What's that? The 16th and 17th, I believe. Correction, no, just in the 14th and 15th centuries. Thank you, Antonio. No, I get another correction. The 15th. Come on, Antonio. The 15th and 16th centuries. Okay, well, I think we'll say it happened back in the day. Let's go with a safe back in the day, historically.
Vitiligo. There it is.
Or is it vitiligo? Vitiligo?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, there's a lot. Everyone knows about how many. So we've had one.
Okay.
Lynn. And so Lynn from personal experience is talking about that. Antonio F. And I knew the doc would be able to help us. Vitiligo or vitiligo with the stress on. Oh, it is vitiligo. Yeah, he's got a phonetic medical pronunciation in there. Thank you for that. Is your book available on Kindle? That's a quickie.
Yes, both are.
Okay, both available. Go to, and that's both from louiseross.com?
Yes, and that just takes you through to Amazon.
Marvellous. Question, would you consider doing an audiobook with the actual interviewees reading their own parts? Let's come back to that as well. Another excellent question. Louise, what's your story? Oh, yes. Now, this often, it's a bit like DJ, so they don't have to dance. Do interviewers interview so they don't have to answer their questions? We'll come back to that as well. Lots of lovely questions. Let's catch up with all the other comments. Who would believe these tales if we saw them in a movie? Amazing, says Donna. Absolutely. The Dutch side of my family came to the UK. My great-grandfather sailed to Australia to go gold prospecting. Wow. Back when men were men and women were men, married and had the first of many children there. First wife. Oh, look at these stories. He remarried and came back to the UK to run a London pub. Of his many children, lots settled in America and Canada. We have such tame lives, really, don't we? It is all relative. I have met up with relatives who have an uncanny look of my mother. He was quite a character. He would be, wouldn't he? 2 of his female children had illegitimate children and were supported by him to keep them, really. Penny, amazing story. Garvo, most Brits don't know what you're on about. We can explain that. We can unfold that. Lol, and that will be the third I in. It's not vitiligo. It's vitiligo, I think. People as confused by me as they are by Garvo. Life is messy. We've already said that here. Antonio F. with all his corrections, and Telmo Santosh, 15th and 16th century. I think we've nailed that now. So, publisher then. Did you self-publish or did you find a publisher for these?
Well, no, I used a publisher in Ireland, in Dublin. Excuse me one moment.
It's a 90-minute thing, isn't it? It's exhausting. It's the 90-minute endurance test that is this. Eventually, you have a sip of water and a cough. So go ahead.
A very small little outfit that was recommended to me, and David was fantastic, or is fantastic, and there's no book advance or anything like that. He just really works with you to sell the book through Amazon. So it's actually available at a little indie bookstore here in Cascais and in Lisbon as well, but mostly on Amazon. So publishing is a very different game these days. Way back, it's about 15 years ago, I wrote chick lit, romantic comedy or rom-com. And In those days, there was nothing like there is now. And I did self-publish those under a business umbrella of a spin-off product and book publishing. And you had to publish in bulk in order to keep the price of the per book down. But now, of course, there's Kindle Direct Publishing, which is a platform through Amazon that allows you to upload your manuscript in the cover, so the actual layout of the book, to Amazon, and then it's print on demand.
Yeah.
So it's actually wonderful because there is no waste. There's no printing the books and sticking them on a bookshelf and in a bookstore, and when they don't sell, the book dealer sends them back to the publisher and says they're not selling, and then the publisher is stuck with all these books. So it's print on demand through Amazon, and I work with a publisher in Dublin to do the book layout and get the book up onto Amazon.
And are they more technical than they are marketing? Because that's, I mean, traditionally that was the benefit of, wasn't it, of getting in advance and getting a big publisher behind you, is that they would commit to your marketing as well, because that's where the money was made.
Less and less these days, because I mean, again, the business of writing books and publishing books has just changed enormously. What a publisher wants is, first of all, if they take you on, is that you're a rock star already. So you're guaranteed sales. And again, years ago, I've had several agents in the past. One of my agents was wonderful, and I had a cookbook concept for this particular agent to shop around. And it was at the time when Anthony Bourdain, bless his heart, he's no longer here, had just released Kitchen Confidential, and it was huge. And suddenly I realized, oh God, and a little Gwyneth Paltrow was working with the Italian chef, you know, creating some kind of vegan, vegetarian, Italian cookbook. I'm like, oh God, look at what I'm up against.
And God knows what else in her recipes. Let's not go there.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And I got a call from my agent one day, and he said, Louise, this is such a great concept, but I'm not getting anywhere with it. You're just not a rock star. Unfortunately, you know, I've got a good sense of humor. I'm Australian. I'm like, yeah, I understand. Okay. But see, this is what you're up against when you're not a rock star, when you're an unknown. So basically, you have to develop your own author platform, it's called. You've basically got to become an online rock star. You have to show that you have readership and that you have an audience in order for a publisher to take you on, because there is less and less money in marketing these days. They want to see that you're already doing the legwork yourself. So it's a really different landscape.
Fascinating. And of course, you can always say now you've been on the Good Morning Portugal show, which, you know, that will add to your rock star cachet, obviously.
Well, Carl, I don't want to burst your bubble, but I've done lots of these sorts of shows.
Are you telling me I'm not a rock star as well now?
Well, you are. You are. You are becoming a total rock star.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My male ego needed that. Thank you so much. Okay, Pete's excellent question. Would you consider doing an ebook with the actual interviewees?
Audiobook.
Yes.
An audiobook.
I beg your pardon. Yeah, with the interviews doing their own audio.
Well, one of the things that I did do is, because I haven't been able to do any in-person presentations with the men's book, and people were curious about the men. A lot of the women in the various communities that I've done the presentations to on the women's book knew some of the women in the women's book, but nobody knew the men. So what I did is, I have a virtual assistant, actually, because, you know, I don't do a lot of this social media on my own, because I'm of the generation that can barely use my iPhone, let alone get around social media. Anyway, so I have a virtual assistant who set me up on Instagram, and she redid my YouTube channel. So once my virtual assistant had created the YouTube channel for me, I'm like, well, this is great, but I don't have anything on it.
Yes.
So then I realized that one of the things that I could do was go back to the men and do little mini interviews like we're doing now, but just 15 minutes, not an hour and a half. and upload these interviews to the YouTube channel so that people could see the men, and I'd get them to read like a paragraph or a page from their book. A lot of the men are not speaking English as maybe a second or third language, so they're not necessarily comfortable reading their story in English, but they do. So I do have a YouTube channel, listeners, and that is, I think, Louise Ross Expat Writer, something like that.
Will it go through? Does it go through from your website that I've got on the screen there?
I think there is a link. Yeah, if they go to my website, they see the little camera or the little video link that goes through to my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And there they see two playlists. They see the playlist for the men's book and the playlist for the women's book. And I do some interviews with the men, and there's a few interviews with the women up there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's my website. And then down the bottom, if you scroll down to the bottom, down. There it is.
There's your icon at the bottom there.
There's the YouTube one after the Facebook icon.
You're doing pretty well for somebody who can as you're self-confessed, barely use your iPhone. We've got Facebook, what's that one? Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube there as well. And
the other one's Instagram.
Insta. You said Insta. That's very that's how.
Well, that's what you say apparently, Carl.
Yes. All right, I will do that from now on. Okay, and this is we're talking of publishing, and there is obviously
audiobooks, and someone asked me about audiobooks, so I did check into that, but it's quite an expense actually to produce an audiobook. So what, in fact, this might be a moment for me to toot my horn again. So in fact, what I'm going to be launching later this month is a podcast. So it's a spin-off of Women Who Walk, the book, because it's Women Who Walk podcast. And that's also on my website. You'll see a placeholder on my website. So I'm going to be interviewing women, just as I did in the book, but women beyond Portugal.
Right.
So I've got the book there as a placeholder, but a logo will go there soon.
Okay, so I'm going to toot my horn as well, because I've just finished recording an ebook. A Russian writer.
You did?
Yes, a Russian writer. I saw a Facebook post. We're looking for a voiceover, a reader for this book. It's been the most incredible experience. I said, I'd like to do that. And we've done it. We've never met each other, the team. And I've worked with a sound engineer in Russia, the author, and I've read his book, which is his memoir, and a collection of poems. And it's been the most wonderful experience to be involved with. So I would obviously encourage you to do it and hire me. But obviously,
I was going to say, yes, maybe you could do the men's book, but how much do you charge? I mean,
we'll get more people to talk to your people, but I'm sure we can come to an arrangement, right? That's
I've done my research, and I'm like, okay, do I want to spend several €1,000 doing an audio book that may not reap the return?
Yeah,
you could do it cheap, could you? We'll talk.
Yeah, let's talk. Fantastic. Okay. Yes, so I think that does it for the audiobook and Pete's excellent question. I think we'll finish with that other rather marvelous question from Johnny. So, Louise, what's your story?
What's my story? Well, my story.
Hold your fire, because there are some other logistical things we need to address, such as no Amazon, please. And there are people who are offended by Amazon.
I know. Yes, they are.
So is there another way to do it?
Yes, there's that wonderful little indie bookstore in Cascais called Agi Livreiros, which is right opposite the park where the carousel is.
Yeah.
So the park in Cascais, I can never remember the name of it, but it's got the children's carousel, and then there's the little pop-up. What do you call the little pop-up? Coffee stands. I can't remember. What is it in Portuguese?
A kiosk.
A kiosk. The kiosk, that's right. Kiosk. So it's basically right opposite the kiosk, Agi Livreiros, and they have the books there. In Lisbon, it's Beefy Bookshop.
Beefy Bookshop, okay.
Yeah. Beaver. Okay. Oh no, Bivar. So I don't think they say beaver. I think they say Bivar.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Portugal Bookshop.
Okay, excellent. So there you go, Khadija Anderson. That's an alternative, possibly mail order for you there, both in cash.
Yeah, and I think Aji Livreros is doing online sales, or you could probably call and speak to Ricardo that owns the store, and he could probably, sell it to you and just and mail it to you.
What a lovely, reassuring, old-fashioned way of doing things, and so without Jeff Bezos taking even more money off the world population.
Yeah.
Excellent. Stephen Wells, no offense taken here, but there has got to be a joke about a face for audiobooks in there somewhere, Carl. I think you made it very well in that simple comment there, Stephen, your band. Followed on it. So yes, you've got a few followers now. Denise and Vinny are following you, and Denise made an interesting comment, or it might be Vinny. My ancestors got sent to Tasmania because they stole silver spoons.
Mine did too.
Seriously? Oh,
not silver spoons, but they got sent to Tasmania. Yeah.
But where some people might say, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. If you got born with a silver spoon in your hand, or just stuffed down the back of your pram after a heist, that gets you sent to Tasmania. So
yeah, that would.
Turned out fine for you all. Excellent. Bondi, a very interesting wallpaper. Amazing how the characters appear.
Oh, I've remembered her name. It's Kathleen Kuchera.
Kathleen Kuchera. There you go. If you want to have a similar backdrop, it is amazing how there's a certain sense of animation in the wonderful illustration behind you. So in the 8, we did it. We got to the 90-minute threshold.
We did.
I think we're going to. In these last 8 minutes, we're going to go back to that question. This sort of So, Louise,
what's my story?
How did you?
Well, I can answer that very quickly and without detail. My story is the last one in the women's book.
Oh, very good. So you got to buy the book.
Well, I mean, you don't have to, but it is there. It's also on my website. Actually, you can download it for free.
Okay. All right. So there you go. Go to the website.
On the page about Louise, there's a little bit of a paragraph, a blurb, and then you can click on a link that goes to my story in the book. So that gives you my story. And the reason I did that, the reason I included it, is that I do find it really odd when people interview you but never share their stories. So it's like you're actually talking to like a blank wall or something.
Yes.
And women that I interviewed did ask me, would you share your story too? And I felt that it was important. It was sort of the full disclosure thing. If they have the courage to share the details of their life, I'm going to do the same. Very good. It's not a journalistic tool, because generally people in the business of news do not share their story. They are sort of a bit of a blank page, if you like. But that's not me. I don't have that background, and I wanted to share my story.
I much prefer your transparency, honesty, authenticity. I think that's a nonsense. I think that's an old-fashioned nonsense of journalism where people say, "Oh, it's not about me; it's about the story, and we're trying to be objective here." Get out of it. How often that might have taken place in 1950 or something like that, 1960. But these journalists who pretend to be objective about something, I mean, to me, it's like science. If as a scientist looking at us, and this is possibly a little bit controversial, but it's very much the same thing. And I think some branches of science acknowledge this. But if you're asking an interview, you're in the interview. Your world, your past, everything about you is in some way as the interviewer, like I am. I can't.
Exactly.
Without bringing myself into it and pretending to be objective. But anyway, sorry for that rant. I'm so glad you take that view.
No, and I do. And in fact, a friend of mine who was a journalist in her young working days read the book, and she said, "Oh, you included your own story. That was a nice touch." A nice touch? Well, whatever.
Very brave.
And the other reason I did actually, Carl, I'll just and then we're probably finishing up. The reason I did do it is that the women's book came about as a result of me working with a memoir writing coach back in the US, because I thought I'd write my own memoir. And once I started working with her and fleshing some things out, it got more and more challenging to the point where I finally said to her, Marion, I don't think I've got enough juicy stuff here to write a memoir. I think I'd probably end up having to make some things up.
Or a few bits from the earlier Chicklet book.
Yeah. So I shelved it. And then it was after that I moved here to Portugal. And then I started to meet all these fascinating people in the international community here. And then I went back to Marion, the memoir writing coach, and I said to her, I've got this idea, Marion. What about if I don't write my memoir, but I write these mini memoirs of all these other women? She said, all right, do it.
All right. And therein lies the role of getting help of mentors and other lots of professionals online who will help you with this. Amazing. Yeah. That's enough for Johnny to go and read it. Johnny there in Belgium. I hope they were deported for something worthwhile. That's what you hope, isn't it? For that, for this ship of shame. That's amazing. And that
actually, I'm very proud of my ancestors who got shipped out to Tasmania.
Yeah, and why wouldn't you be? And it just reminds me of that old joke, we get stopped at Australian immigration and they say, have you got a criminal record? You say, I didn't realise you still needed one. That's probably not the best way to introduce yourself on the Australian border, is it? And I remember I went to, where did I go? To the Gold Coast and I arrived in Australia, and the immigration guy said, g'day, what are you here for? Business or pleasure? And I said, I've come to see a spiritual teacher, actually. And he's like, okay, what's he going to teach you, mate? And I hope you like my accent so far. I said, well, he's going to teach me how to be free of unhappiness. And I thought, this is getting complicated. And he said, have a great stay. That was it. Just came in. I had a lovely time.
Therein lies a very interesting story, Carl. I wish we had another half hour.
I'm just teasing you to interview.
Well, take that to the man cave. That's a very good discussion for the man cave.
I will, because it is obviously being free of unhappiness. Spiritual teachers is all connected with the mental health discussion that you were saying before. Louise has been a great guest this morning. Thanks, Inka. It's an absolute great. But just I'm determined that we get to the 90-minute threshold after our earlier conversation. So these last no, I just want to ask you, because what I thought the book might be about is a useful guide to other expats, to people who are a bit fearful about upping sticks, changing their lives and making them move. Is it meant in part to be an emboldening influence for people who are a little bit worried about moving country?
Readers have given me that feedback. It didn't start out to be that way because I was just more curious about the journeys that these people had taken, because I am fascinated by the human journey, where people come from and how they get to where they're going. I mean, just as a tiny little personal aside, I sometimes ponder myself, how did this kid from a tiny rural town in the backlots of Australia find my place to various places around the world? But that's actually nothing compared to some of the stories in both these books. So I'm just curious about why, when, all those kinds of questions, and the existential questions too about people's journeys. Anyway, what was your question again?
The emboldening effect of the inspirational effect of reading about these stories and thinking, I want to go to Portugal, but I'm a bit worried, I'm a bit scared, about politics. Right.
No, people have responded. They've either emailed me or told me that, or left testimonials saying exactly those, something along those lines, that it's just been inspiring and it's given them the courage to do the same thing. And I do have a pretty big readership, I think, in the US. And as your listeners probably know, there's a huge migration, probably political and health migrants coming from the US.
Yes.
And in particular, I think women are reading the women's book because it is emboldening them to make the move.
Fantastic. So a few more comments. Subscribe on YouTube. We'll buy your books. As always, this program is excellent. Thank you, Louise and Cole. It's been an absolute pleasure this morning. Paul, thoroughly enjoyed listening to Louise this morning. Some interesting reading to come, I think, for Paul there. Great show both. Cheers, Pete. Much appreciated. And thanks for your suggestions. Please talk more about mental health in the future. We will, Milda. in these times that we live in, we can't not, I think. Yeah, fantastic, says the doc. That's why I bought it a while ago. Can't wait to read it now. A little prompt to put it higher on the reading stack there. And people's stories are always the most interesting and life-affirming. Thanks both. It's a pleasure. Louise, thank you so much. And
thank you, Carl.
I hope we can talk again when book 3 is written and published.
Yeah, and if you ever want to talk about mental health, I can do that too.
Marvelous. I think there's going to be lots of people around the world saying, yes, get Louise back for the mental health special. Absolutely. Right. Cheers, Louise. Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Bye. Thanks, Carl.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay. Bye.